Okay, so it appears we are back, and bear with us, folks. In terms of virtual television, this is a first for anybody to ever do anything like this in terms of the debates. And so, what I want to do here very quickly, Jade, ask you a question that might not be asked right now, but it's very important, and that is in regards to the release of the current president's the information that was just released in terms of and his tax return.
Yeah.
Or what has been stated regarding his tax. It is obvious that he has taken full advantage appears to take advantage of the tax code, and that in 2016 he has paid significantly less than the majority of folks when it comes to taxes. Please give me your thoughts on that. What should be considered fair in terms of addressing that situation currently or in the future? And should there be any stopgaps put into the future in regard to making sure that that does not happen again, particularly for somebody that's running as the chief executive officer for the United States?
Yeah, so the first thing I thought when I saw that number of $750 was I need a new tax person, because the president is paying, I'd say about $49,000 less than I did in taxes. And I know I don't make 50,000 times more money than he does. So there's an issue there. But, there's a saying, Warren, which is don't hate the player, hate the game. And so when we look at what actually needs to be reformed, it's the tax code. The tax code right now does a huge disservice to the middle class, as well as to self-employed, to entrepreneurs. We bear a lot of the brunt of the taxes. You look at our 23, $24 trillion deficit. One of the only ways to really see that raising taxes, and we have to raise taxes, not the people we always raise them on, which is the middle class. We're going to have to now see corporations their fair share. So listen, if Donald Trump is able to pay $750 legally, more power to him. I have some questions around whether or not he was able to do that, abiding all the laws. I know that we, like many American business owners, look for all the deductions possible, and I could never get my taxes down that low. So I have some questions about that. But again, I think the focus needs to be on how do you reform the tax code to really address the needs of the people who are hurting the most and carrying the biggest brunt. One of the taxes that I do propose is looking at the disparity, the gap between your wealthiest corporations, the CEOs, and what they pay their minimum wage or median wage workers. You look at, you name it, your Walmart, your McDonald's, you're going to have something like, for Walmart, I believe it is, it's 1,063 times their CEO gets paid 1,063 times more than their median wage worker, who in some states is living below the poverty line. There is no way in a nation that's as great as we're supposed to be that you should be able to build your American dream on the backs of American workers and not have them share in the reward. I believe that that's a great place to start where taxes are concerned. You would tax based on the disparity between that median wage worker and that CEO pay. And I know that that includes stocks and these different sorts of perks. But what we're finding is if you can pay that CEO that much more, you can afford to raise wages. I think we also, aside from taxes, need to be looking at raising the minimum wage, which, Warren, hasn't gone up since 2009. You can't find a car, a house, bread, rice that hasn't gone up in price since 2009. And so the fact that you're expecting American workers to still cover their bills on a 2009 minimum wage rate when it's 2020, almost 21, is absolutely a tragedy. And so we have to now start rewarding our workers and making work worth it. And then we want to make sure that with our taxes, we're not penalizing some of the hardest workers out there, which are your middle class workers. I think it's also quite telling when you do have a president that considers people who pay their taxes suckers, I think that says something. That's not, to me, patriotic whatsoever. If there is a system, it needs to be equal for everyone. Our current tax code also cheats, I believe, our contractors and our self-employed workers. We should all be treated to the same rewards where the tax code is concerned.
Many people in this country are working for minimum wage. Minimum wage varies from state to state. Some of the states have proposed, and I believe Washington, one of them, that is already implemented, where the minimum wage starts at $50 an hour. Yeah. There are many business owners that are screaming and crying foul, saying that's not going to be able to help them keep business going, and it's going to impact the people across the nation. What are your thoughts in terms of raising that minimum wage? And in addition to that, what do you consider, or what would you place as your economic plan? What would you put in place for an economic plan to help not only the small business owners, not so much the large, but also those that work for them in the workforce?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that. I am a small business owner. I am blessed to have an incredible team. And like I said earlier, I was impacted by COVID-19 like many small business owners. I was screwed over by the first round of stimulus. Like many other small business owners, we get served first like we thought. And now as we look at another stimulus, suddenly the money is nowhere to be found. And now the focus is where it's supposed to be, and the money's not going to be there. So I understand the burden of the small business owners. That being said, we have to help as many Americans as possible build a pathway out of poverty. Almost 38 million Americans live below the poverty line. You have workers who are working their butts off. When the president talked about pre-COVID, those jobs numbers he liked to brag about, what he didn't really tell us is that the average American was working 2 to 3 jobs to make ends meet. That's not right. You should be able to work one job, pay for health care, food, water, shelter, whatever you need for your family. You should be able to do that with one job. And many Americans are not able to do that. So when those job numbers look good, they were actually inflated because more Americans were working more jobs than they had to. You had older people who should be, I say, enjoying their golden years. We're having to go back to work for the golden arches, right? So that's not how we should be functioning as well. I do believe we must raise the minimum wage, but you can't ask that of small businesses without also serving small businesses. I believe one of the things to do is create a tiered minimum wage program for small business owners, which means that a lot of them are hiring high schoolers, inexperienced workers who right now, the way things are, would come in at that higher minimum wage and not really be experienced enough to earn that pay. So I believe that for small businesses, we would have a tier so that when you start working over time, that pay increases to that raised minimum wage. I know you said 15. In my company, our minimum wage is $18 an hour, and we're in Texas. We could pay $7.25 if we wanted to, because that's the federal minimum wage. But I believe that when you pay your workers well, they repay you in powerful work. There's nothing that I have here that I could have if it weren't for the people who are working powerfully for me. So I do agree it's going to be a stretch for small business. I think we have to build that stretch in for them. We also reward small businesses. More government contracts need to go to small businesses, especially those emphasizing social good and emphasizing environmental good. I also believe we need to have more support built in to our system for small businesses in terms of financing. So I believe you have to have some mutually beneficial transactions going on between our nation's small businesses. My goal is that we become a producer nation. Israel right now has the #1 number of entrepreneurs. That should be us. We should be producing what Americans need. And so I'm excited about the way that we're going to stretch ourselves as a nation. And I do believe we can serve small businesses in the process.
Under the Obama administration, particularly under the last 3 years of his presidency, he created the most jobs in comparison to the current administration's first 3 years. How would you continue to bring some of the jobs back, particularly
Warren, you froze on me there. I'm going to answer what I think you were asking, which is how would we bring back jobs, particularly in the midst of what's going on with COVID-19, and re-ask the question if that wasn't it. I think we have to stop lying to ourselves and saying that all we have to do is bring jobs back. The truth is that many of the jobs that existed before COVID-19 will not exist into the future. We have to wrap our heads around that. And what we have to understand is that a large part of what we're going to have to do is create jobs, Warren, from scratch, create jobs. We're looking at something that looks like, look at the Rooseveltian era, with the WPA, where the government now is going to have to, I believe, subsidize jobs, create jobs. And what you do is you make sure that whatever the government creates serves the nation. For instance, we're going to need to re-employ many people who lost their jobs during COVID-19. And I think one of the ways we do that is in pandemic proofing our nation. We talk a lot about recovery. I know we're going to get back to COVID-19 recovery, but the truth is we still haven't even reopened powerfully or in the proper way. We don't have the number of testing and tracing that we need still to this day. The opportunity lies in re-employing many people who were let off even before COVID-19 from our public health departments. We defunded a lot of those. That needs to be refunded so that we can hire, I've been saying for months now, the number is probably greater now, but at least 30,000 new public health department employees. The wonderful thing is we can model after what we see in third world countries who handled COVID-19 better than we did because they are used to many of these epidemic issues. And so what they do is employ people right there in the community. They train them to be able to do testing, tracing. That's one of the jobs that we'll have to recreate. I also believe we have the opportunity for our construction industry, for manufacturing to begin to build a whole network now of storehouses across the nation so that we can be prepared in the future for pandemics. And I think we also get to employ many of our farmers and growers who were left hanging during COVID-19. Many of their crops died in the field. They'll be the people supplying our new storehouses. We also get to create a national inventory where we can finally know what we have and what we don't. One of the big tragedies of COVID-19 at the beginning, we didn't know what states had what. Many of the states didn't even know what they had on stock. So we need now a new cataloging system so that from a federal level, we know what the states have, the states know what they have, and we can always know when supplies are low. So job creation is the name of the game. And as a creative, I love the idea of being able to think creatively outside of the box about ways to put Americans back to work. But again, we're joking, we're lying to ourselves if we think all we have to do is reopen. We have to reopen what does exist, and then we have to create from scratch new opportunities for Americans to work and serve their country in the process.
The current president, Donald Trump, has stated that he has done more for Black Americans than Lincoln. And that's pretty much a quote. And so it's very important, being a woman of color, being of African American descent, why should voters trust you more than any of the opponents when it comes to dealing with any form of race relations issues or any issues for the next 4 years?
You know what I want? I want Americans to start trusting themselves, Warren. I want them to start doing their own homework. I can tell you from behind the scenes here, what you see is not what's really happening. We are watching the narrative be shaped by the media, force-fed to us, and we're being made to believe things that simply aren't true. And we've been lazy as individual citizens. We have not done our homework. When the president says something like that, we need to start listening to that thing inside of us that says, that doesn't sound quite right. If you did that homework, you'd know, like I said earlier, that even pre-COVID, we were not seeing the best real job situation. The numbers look good. Numbers are real, but they can be manipulated. 2 to 3 jobs is what the average American had to work. That doesn't make the job numbers good. It means that we are overworking to make ends meet. Another number that's not right. This has not been the best economy for African Americans. Only 22% of African Americans since this president have seen some kind of positive increase in their income. So I want us to stop regurgitating the talking points of politicians who are fighting to stay in power. And I want us to start doing our own research. Ask yourself, what's your pocketbook looking like? What are your taxes looking like? And what we have to stop doing is judging our economy by outdated measures like the stock market and the GDP. That only relates to a sliver of our population. The average American trying to figure out how to afford the next trip to the market. They're not thinking about the stock market, right? So I think we now have to start speaking in layman's terms and addressing everyday American problems. And so when you say, why should they trust me? I think you will hear another candidate begging people to hold her accountable. I meet people on the street, Warren, who get so excited either because I'm a woman or because I'm Black or because I can put a sentence together and they go, "You've got my vote." And you know what I say? I say, not so fast. Don't be that easy. We have been promiscuous with our democracy. And I believe we have allowed politicians to feel entitled to our votes. I demand that before people jump on our bandwagon, they do their homework. Because the policies, the proposals, the messaging that we put out is not going to change. So we want to make sure that what you see is not only what you get, but it is what resonates with you. And I think that one thing, Americans taking their votes back and declaring that you don't get my loyalty because you're red or you're blue or you're Black or you're white. You must earn my vote as an American citizen. And you do that by serving me powerfully, not through rhetoric, but through actual proposals and not empty promises. You'll notice I don't make a lot of promises, but I present a lot of vision and a lot of proposals and policy so that you can at least go in the poll in your booth, vote for a decision maker that you can trust, a vision that you believe in. That's the new wave of behavior that I believe Americans have to engage in order to finally make our politicians serve us as they've been pledging to do.
One of the challenges that has taken place with all of the disparity in terms of law enforcement is that people are crying out and requesting that there should be reform. Law enforcement is taking a bad rap, particularly in the African American community. Not to say that all police are bad, to say that there has been some disparity that has taken place and there's been a cry for a number of years. Please, what is your perspective in terms of law enforcement? How should it be handled? Should it be cleaned up? And if so, what way?
I don't know why we feel it's bad to admit that we have systems that need to be cleaned up. And the way that the way our politics is set up, it demands that we position ourselves against each other. And I think if you want to do a disservice to the police, then you allow the system to stay as it is. If you want to do a disservice to communities, then you allow the system to stay as it is. We're watching, I believe, our president polarize. We're watching people on the left polarize. And what's happening now is Americans still aren't being served. Since George Floyd, how many more lives have been lost that haven't made the news? So now the discussion has to change, and it must be one of cleanup, and it must be one of collaboration. I have police friends who say to me, nobody hates a bad cop worse than a good cop. And I believe that, but I also believe you can't expect a system to reform itself. So I do believe you can't have a serious conversation about law enforcement reform until you talk about reforming qualified immunity. That's been getting punted back and forth in Congress right now. It hasn't gone anywhere. so far. People are wanting to name streets after George Floyd. I'll tell you what, George Floyd would rather be alive than have a street named after him. And so I think we do have to push beyond symbolism all the way to progress. I'm tired of people kneeling in kente cloth at the Capitol. I'm tired of you giving me Aunt Jemima shelves. That's not progress. So I think we now need powerful collaborative efforts, crisis prevention. Imagine a day now where, and policemen will tell you this, many of the calls they're called to don't need police. They need mental health services, social services, family services. Imagine collaborative efforts. Talk about how you would fund powerfully. You fund collaborative efforts that have not only law enforcement, but social services, so that when you come to a call and it's really a psychological break and not an actual act of violence being perpetrated out of crime, then that situation is able to be de-escalated. What we need now is community efforts to see people serve powerfully. I know that there are police who believe that their loyalty is to the communities they serve. That's who we should be elevating. We should be making sure that police chiefs are able to fire these so-called bad apples. Let me tell you why they're not just bad apples. Bad apples, when they stay around like a Derek Chauvin and have more than 14 plus offenses, they're not just bad apples. They actually spread bad seed. And that bad seed actually bears bad fruit. That's how you get two officers standing next to him, allowing him to behave that way, because they know if he's gotten away with this for this many years, us interfering with his regular behavior could be detrimental to us. When we call for backup, are policemen going to come? So there is a good old boy network that needs to be weeded out. The history of policing is not only controversial, but it is definitive. It has always, in the very beginning, it pit black against white. So we have work to do, Warren, and I don't think that it's anti-police to admit that. And I think policemen will tell you that there is stuff that needs to be cleaned out. I think we start with reforming qualified immunity. I think we also need a national registry to track offenses. Imagine if we could have seen when Derek Chauvin hit offense number 5. I guarantee you he wouldn't be around for events number 14. I also think we have to not only talk in terms of black and white, talk in terms of green. That's a whole different. We're talking about pensions, and when you're talking about also penalizing by way of not having taxpayers pay for the court cases of the accused policemen. In my job, nobody's paying for my defense, right? If I'm up on charges of brutality. So I think if you want to affect behavior, you affect the pocketbook as well. So those are just a few of the reforms that I believe we have to look into very seriously. And I think doing so is not being anti-police. It's supporting police also in a way that they can do their job and make sure that they are working next to people who pledge the same loyalty and the same code. And that's a powerful discussion to have. Neither party is going to allow you to have that discussion because it's more profitable for them to pit policemen against their people in the communities. And that ends up with more death and more violence. So I think the discussion has to be changed.
What we're going to do, we're going to take a quick 60-second break. And when we come back, we'll have more with Jade Simmons on Debate 2020, the alternative choice.
What if this weren't really the end of something we loved, but the start of something new? I'm Jade Simmons, and I'm running with you so that we can finally become who we've always said we've been, the America, where we learn new things together, where we build new things together, where we are revitalized, redeemed, and restored.
I'm Jade Simmons, a candidate for President of the United States, and I approve this message.
Welcome back to Decision 2020, Debate 2020. My name is Warren Winston, and we have been spending this time with Jade Simmons, independent candidate that is running for the position. And we've covered a lot of territory, but we're going to continue to move on. It is important to talk about systemic racism and what it's looked like, since we continue to talk about law enforcement. Do you believe that there is systemic racism in the country? And if so, what is your perspective on Trump, the Donald Trump administration, in terms of ending sensitivity training that most people believe, or quite a few people believe, is necessary?
So is there systemic racism? Yes. I feel like it's the easiest question to answer. The fact that we debate it, it says a lot about what we would like to believe about who we are versus really facing who we have been and the types of practices we've allowed for way too long. We now have universal buy-in, Warren, that systemic racism, systemic injustices have existed. I can't think of another time where we've had these sorts of statements of solidarity coming from corporations. Now, whether or not we buy those statements is another story, but I say it doesn't matter. I say this is an incredible time to lean in now to a discussion that should have been happening for a long time. My father is a civil rights activist. Race relations is a second language to me. I'm one of the few people who love talking about race, not because it divides us, but because candid, empathetic, powerful, passionate discussions about race and culture and ethnicity can unify us in ways we never thought possible. In terms of the president's actions, sensitivity training, my issue with it is not that we have it. It's that I don't think we take it seriously. And I believe sensitivity training has become yet another symbolic thing that we do, and we don't put any accountability on it to yield results. I don't believe that we should be teaching that as a nation we're evil and have nowhere to go. But I don't think we should be in denial of the evil things we have perpetrated. We have a lot of blood on our hands as a nation. Slavery is just those areas. And so I do believe in things like reforming the way we teach history in our schools. I was very blessed, Warren. I have a father who, when we came home from school, taught us history all over again. I understood the history of Africans, the contributions we made to medicine, the contributions we made to culture, to civilization. And had I not been taught that way by my parents, I would be subjected to the very limited concept of slavery, Jim Crow, and chronic poverty. That would be the only thing I would know about the existence of Black people in this country. And so I do believe we need to be retaught. Our teachers need to be retaught. When we are teachers from a dominant culture going into a minority neighborhood to teach, we have to understand the background of these kids. I believe in racial equity training as well, so that teachers are equipped, not taken off guard when they're in settings that they aren't used to, in cultures that they don't have experience with. I think knowledge is power. And as long as we are training each other, learning to know more than we knew before, that's a good thing. We shouldn't be afraid of learning something we didn't know. And I think that kind of denial is dangerous. I also think, unfortunately, that the president is pandering to a small part of his base who wants to believe that things are just fine as they are. And I think that that's dangerous thinking. We are a society that has evolved. And I think we finally got to a point where we want to know what we've been pretending not to know. And that's a crucial moment in history that I think we should take advantage of.
In many cities, there have been protests that have been taking place, particularly since the George Floyd incident, but needless to say, it's just more than George Floyd at this point. And in some instances, it has turned violent. Should the President of the United States take the initiative to call the mayors of cities like Portland to request the National Guard to end the violence which is in that particular city is taking place over 100 days, or should he leave it up to the governor to make that decision?
I think, there's been a lot of hypocrisy as we've watched COVID-19 and the George Floyd era kind of persist. When it came to wanting to have a national strategy for combating COVID-19, we wanted to leave that up to the states. When I think we should have had a national blueprint for states to be able to customize. When we reopened schools, we said, let the teachers figure it out. Let the states decide. And we really left them hanging without giving them a powerful pathway back to reopen safely. Yet suddenly, when it comes to this issue, I feel like the president has used it again to pander to a certain base. He's been running now on this concept of law and order, which I think is a lost opportunity to only call this an issue of law and order when it's an issue now of justice and an uprising now of a voice that needs to be heard that has been silenced for too long. And so I think it's a little bit ironic that now all of a sudden, the president wants to use this federal power. I think the media has also done us a disservice. It has put the attention on the violence and the riots. It has not also told the story like in Minneapolis, where we just came from, where we found out that white supremacists also came to Minneapolis to burn down Black stores and to start a lot of the looting, so that when the media covered it, it was you only saw Black faces perpetrating. And so I think we have a lot of accountability that needs to go around on our media as well. I know it makes greater clickbait to cover the violence, but we've done a grave disservice to the actual peaceful protests that have been going on. So we want to look for consistency now in leadership. That if this is really a nation that lets states decide what's best, then let states decide what's best. What I think we saw was a great missed opportunity for our president to lean into this moment, to not make it us against them, but to say, look, we have come to a great moment of reset. We have an opportunity as a nation to lean into this difficult moment, to look at hard, ugly truths and to find a way out of this. I think this was a missed opportunity. And as voters go to the polls now, you have to ask yourself, what do you want your leader to be able to communicate through in this moment? Do we want an instigator in chief who is going to use this to political advantage and create more suspicion, more paranoia, and cause more violence, most likely? Do you want an absentee in chief who's not going to speak powerfully, who's going to hide this thing out, wait this thing out in order not to offend? Or do we need a leader now that is going to say the hard things, but is able to do it in love, in a way that's unifying, in a way that's able to find uncommon common ground? I think we know what the answer should be for that.
When it comes to addressing the challenges that we've been going through, Donald Trump has criticized Joseph Biden, Vice President Biden, about his thoughts towards Antifa. Yet there are folks that criticize him for not addressing white supremacy and the militia groups. How would you, as president, address either of those groups or any groups, and what plan of action as a leader would be the best approach?
Well, I think we have to get used to, again, consistency instead of hypocrisy. So you're watching, and I forget the gentleman's name now, it wasn't a gentleman, the young boy who shot peaceful protesters is being called a patriot, yet peaceful protesters are being called criminals. So there's a hypocrisy there. And I think it's that kind of hypocrisy that leaks down into American society and makes us justify things that shouldn't be justified. So one of the things that I think needs to happen now is we have to be clear and we have to call a thing a thing. You would see one of the first things that I would love to see done, and what I would do is call groups that are engaging in terrorism, call them terrorists. So for instance, you have the KKK, who for years has operated, and their history includes the lynching of African Americans, yet they've never been classified as a terrorist group. So when we have people who are terrorizing, when you're engaged in acts of terrorism, that's what you should call them, terrorists. And so when you have people shooting into crowds of protesters that are peaceful, that's a terrorist. He wasn't defending himself. So I think we now have a season coming ahead. We're going to have to call a thing what it is, and not just pick and choose. And I saw someone compliment me for not going off topic. I'm going to do something a little bit unusual and go off topic and say that often what I notice is we use these different hashtags and labels when they're convenient, but we don't stay consistent with them. And so I think this is now an era for consistency. And I think in order to rebuild trust, not only in government, but in each other, we've got to be consistent about the things that we call out, whether or not they are things that we've historically agreed with or not. We have to be consistent in how we label things.
Most recently, the president has started to push in terms of creating programs for African Americans. In particular, he's talked about the MultiPlatinum or the Platinum program for African Americans. Your thoughts on whether this is an effective way of addressing a challenge that has been outstanding for centuries, or is this just another way of, for lack of words, putting the pacifier in the baby's mouth to be able to try to satisfy different folks that it affects, and particularly the African American community?
I mean, timing is everything. I would have loved to hear a plan like this in 2016 when he was running for office. You understand? I don't want to hear now about Biden's Lift Every Voice plan or the MultiPlatinum plan because it's an election year. You know, I want to see where are these parties in between the election cycles? Are they really reinvesting in our communities when it's not 2020 and 2024 and 2016? And unfortunately, I don't think that's going to be a affirmative answer. We put forth what I call Breakthrough for Black America plan. It's funny, when I talk about these plans, people accuse me of being reverse racism. But when the president puts forth a plan, then he's forward thinking. Listen, just because I'm African American doesn't mean that I can't serve all Americans. I'd be proud to be a president to every citizen of this nation. I believe running as an independent allows me to do that differently than any of our partisan options. But I also believe that a president for all must look to see who he or she needs to be a champion for. And it is time we have a champion for underserved people groups. African Americans are at the top of that list. So you'll see specific programs, Warren, unapologetically that we put forth that do uniquely serve African Americans. You'll see we talk about needing a whole new Marshall Plan. I always say we went all the way to Europe, right? In the late 40s, invested $12 billion helping them recover from the devastation of the war. We invested in order to make their trade better, in order to make their economy better, but we haven't reinvested in our own communities, our African American communities, tax-paying communities. Instead, we see these communities suffer from gentrification. Those same groups, developers that move in don't do anything to better the actual community. We see Black people moved out of these. I'm from Charleston, South Carolina, one of the most beautiful cities in the world, one of the most incredible rates of gentrification in the world, something that my father fights against. You'll see me talk about education reform, economic reform, as well as law enforcement reform. You've got to have all three. I believe our nation's corporations should be considering reinvesting 2% at least back into Black communities and Black businesses. For those who are worried that that's only serving one group, I always use this example of the curb cut effect. It's a book that was written in very late terms. We went through in our streets, Warren, and we put in these kind of ramps so that people who were disabled, had wheelchairs, could get onto our sidewalks more easily. Now, we did that for that one specific group. But do you know who else benefited from that? Women and parents with strollers benefited from that. Bike riders benefited from that. And what the model is showing us is that when you do something for the underserved, everybody is lifted up. When we invest back into Black businesses specifically. Right now, we're looking at, I think it's something like $13 trillion of lost money where Black businesses are concerned. Black businesses don't have the same access to capital, to financing. When you begin to invest in Black business specifically, you'll see a 3 to 4% increase in the GDP. That's everybody. Remember that GDP again? That's everybody benefiting. So I do believe we need programs uniquely serving the Black community. I do outline those at Operation Rescue 20 in a plan called Breakthrough for Black America. I talk about it in terms of reinvestment as well as restitution. These are things that must be done. And you'll also see there, we talk about uniquely identifying the needs of small business owners, uniquely identifying the needs of Native Americans, that will be released in the next day or two, uniquely identifying the needs of mental health. And so we believe that it's time now to go through and micro-target groups that have been historically underserved, elevate them to a level playing field, and then you watch our entire economy soar. That's how you actually make America great. It's not by keeping people who are already doing great, helping them do greater. It's helping people who have not had access to the same levels of opportunity, raising them so that we get the equal playing field that we all deserve.
Many people will say that a lot of this whole chant, if you will, of Make America Great Again is with the intentions of trying to suppress people, because more so where the majority is now becoming more of the minority. Your thoughts on how to address those minorities that
I didn't hear your end of your question, Warren. If you're able to come back on. I heard something about flipping the majority and minority. I'll wait, and I'm looking at some of your comments on the side here. Christine says, we'd rather have separated land, resources to help our communities, and reparations for the next 100 years to us all to gain generational wealth. Some people would, Christine, want to have separation. I don't believe that we're supposed to be separated, but I do believe that our nation owes a great debt to people who have built this economy on their backs, quite literally. Black women specifically, when you look at birthing camps from the very beginning, we birthed the labor that this economy was built on. So I do believe that there's a price to be repaid. When I think about reparations specifically, what I get concerned about is a one-time check. If you're looking at a one-time check, which I think the amount was somewhere close to $200,000 by one calculation, I wouldn't even be able to send both of my kids to college on that check. There is no check amount right now in this season that I can think of that this government would pay that would repay us for the damage done systemically from slavery and then from racism. I think what we owe now is the generations that we won't get to see. We owe them. So we must actually build in systemic success. That requires more than one paycheck. I do believe that land is also owed. I'm excited about the land that was finally given to Native Americans in Oklahoma. So I do believe there are lots of things that need to be done, but I don't believe that cutting a check is the only answer.
Let me just shift very quickly here and talk about climate change. What do you believe about the science of climate change, and what would you do about it over the next 4 years?
Well, I mean, I believe in science. I also believe in God. I don't think the two things are mutually exclusive. I say that because I see shirts all the time that say they believe in one or the other. I think one of the greatest disservices we've done is that we have not spoken about the environment in a way that would garner buy-in from everyday American citizens. We always talk about it in an existential sense. We always talk about it in terms of polar ice caps, and polar bears. We should talk about the fact that in so many homes, you have water that's not drinkable, air that's not breathable in American communities right here. Flint only comes up right now, 2016, we'll maybe hear about it again. It's not even at the top of the list in terms of communities that are dealing with lead in their water. And we now know as well that testing scores in our schools are affected based on the amount of lead kids are consuming. So we're seeing lower test scores that correlate with higher amounts of lead in our water. So I think if you want Americans to care about the environment, you got to let them know you care about the environment in their homes and in their neighborhoods right where they are. I believe that water as well is a right, and we must keep it clean. We also must make sure it's not turned off, especially in times of crisis, as we saw during COVID-19. I think the environment has to come to the forefront because we are called to be good stewards of this environment. So you would see an administration that supports efforts to improve things like our carbon emissions, which, by the way, we saw universally that dropped during COVID-19. And what we didn't do was take advantage of it, right? As we started bailing out airlines, for instance, that should have come with the caveat of being able to keep in environmental protection related to that bailout. We have a president who's a deal maker. Those are the types of deals we should be making, mutually beneficial transactions now, not just one-sided transactions that we've been seeing. So I believe we have an opportunity to be the leading resource to the rest of the world for alternative energy. Instead, we've been put wayside. You saw Italy, who had a drastic reduction in carbon emissions, China as well during COVID-19. Italy now wants to make those a permanent reality. And so we should be the resource to help these nations do that. So I believe positioning powerfully in terms of taking care of our environment also helps us economically in the long run.
Kind of piggybacking on that, there has been a lot of argument about the Green New Deal. There are plenty of folks that are for it. There are some folks that are against it. Vice President Biden has recommended spending millions on energy homes, but I would like you to share truly your perspective on the impact a Green New Deal would have to the economy, or the potential impact to not only global warming, to hurricanes, to everything else. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think anyone who's in denial at this point that something is happening with climate is just that, in denial. We're looking at the fires that we're having everywhere, the windstorms, the hurricanes. I think Australia lost over 1 million different species in the fires they had over the last few months. We have to get serious now about combating these issues. First of all, again, this is an area of research that people need to do. The Green New Deal isn't one new deal. It's been a bunch of proposals that have been tried and presented over and over, but there is no one new deal at this point. Part of the Green New Deal that I thought I would not go for, and am now a proponent of, is the fact that we need more government subsidized jobs. COVID-19 really laid that wound open and poured salt into it. And so you'll hear me talking about that, not in relation necessarily to the Green New Deal, but related necessarily to the economy. So I believe that's something we're going to have to do, is create jobs now and put Americans to work for the good of the nation. I think where we look at making a lot of improvements is in pandemic proofing, what I call also ongoing emergency preparation. I think we should be incentivizing the building of new construction. First of all, many of these corporations, the president promised to bring jobs back, but he actually signed tax laws that incentivize them to stay abroad. We actually now need them to really come back. And a part of that incentivizing, I think, also means that our corporations here, we incentivize them to use construction that is more environmentally sound. We also build in now pre-pandemic structures. Imagine now almost like pandemic flipping a building, being able to go to a stadium that is already uniquely set up to flip in the time of a pandemic, so that we don't lose time going in and having to build from scratch like we did this time around. I think these are things that we can do now excuse me, with new environmental guidelines in place. To me, it's an exciting time to do things better than we did before. We now see there's a need for all of these things. So I believe we have more motive, more motivation, and more incentive now to actually follow through on a lot of these things that seem so far out to so many people not that long ago.
We certainly have a whole lot more to cover. We're going to probably go for about another 30 minutes or so, but what we're going to do is we're going to take a quick break, and then we're going to come back addressing the United States and our own personal debate with Jade Simmons right up more after this.
These are animals.
You cannot do
These
it.
aren't people.
What if you weren't really seeing the whole story? What if we're not trapped, but we're being reminded of how precious liberty really is? What if in the midst of all the darkness, we're getting a chance to shine brightly together? What if we weren't really divided? What if we were becoming united again? Let's tell the whole story of who we really are. The America where we learn new things together, where we build new things together, where we are revitalized, redeemed, and restored. I'm Jade Simmons, and I'm running with you so that we can finally become who we've always said we've been. One nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all, for real.
I'm Jade Simmons, a candidate for President of the United States, and I approve this message.
We are back with more debate and more addressing the situation that's going on, not only with current President Trump and Vice President Joseph Biden, but we're also talking about the same issues that are being presented in the debate right now. I want to go into election integrity, but before I even go into integrity, I want to kind of ask you a question that has been put out there a number of times. When it comes to your platform in which you're stating you honor God, what is your plan for us as a nation to honor God more than what we do right now?
You know, I've run openly with my faith out front because Christianity to me has been manipulated, on the right especially. I've watched my faith be hijacked and not resemble anything that I have learned to love or to practice. And so instead of pretending I wasn't a person of faith or not talking about my faith and having people go dig and then find out, oh my God, she's a minister. She wrote a book on prayer. Maybe she's just like, enter whatever negative example you want there. I thought it would be more powerful to come out letting people know what my faith was and how it informed my decision-making. When I say honor God, and I feel like we've been extremely clear about this, it has nothing to do with proselytizing the nation. It has nothing to do with making people believe like I do. It is simply me doing what I feel all leaders should do, which is be transparent about what their source is, what their inspiration is, what their guide is. So for me, being a person of faith, a follower of Christ, means it helps me determine how I treat people, how I honor people. To honor God means to me to serve his people and to serve them all the same. To honor God means that I don't make a distinction between me and someone else because we look differently, because we're different genders, or because we believe differently. To me, a nation that honors God serves people. So people always say to me, what do you think about being the first Black female president? I actually think about being the first genuinely servant leader president who says, I put all political affiliation, partisanship aside, and I put service at the forefront. And so to me, to honor God, even when we have a nation of people who are allowed, freely allowed, not to believe in them, to believe in God means that I still serve them in the same way. One nation means that we have a nation that has one justice system, that has one leader who decides that their job and their mission is to serve all people, regardless of how they might believe or live differently. So honor God to me is not about religion. It's about having the faith to believe that we can live together as a varied diverse people, and we can serve each other powerfully honor, protect, serve, and love each other, and find unity and uncommon common ground. That's what that means to me, and it's been exciting that even people who believe differently, Warren, we've had atheists and agnostics who even have found a home in Operation Restoration because they have not heard faith talked about in this way. So we're excited by what us leading in faith has meant for the people who found us. It's not something to be feared. It is something that we feel should put people at ease because it means that our mandate is to serve as many human beings possible.
I'm going to get a little personal for a second here. And it's basically personal thought, more so than on a national level. You have many people of faith, those particularly that serve as pastors and leaders and rabbis, that have put their whole political beliefs and their whole political faith, if you will, behind Donald Trump, simply because of the platform of the Republican Party, more so than what many would consider the beliefs followed under the Bible or whatever belief they have. How would you address, what are your thoughts on those people, you know, those of cloth, if you will, in terms of how they have been following someone who has shown more than once that their integrity has been something that has not only compromised the office of President of the United States, but has compromised the nation as a whole?
I think this is I've been saying this in private conversations. This is a choose ye this day moment. Now, this is just a conversation now between me and people of like-minded faith. I think we're supposed to remember that we don't bow down to elephants or we don't bow down to donkeys, and we're not supposed to be worshiping our father in the White House or our mother in the White House, whoever he or she is. That for followers of Christ, we're supposed to be looking now for a very specific thing in our leadership and in how we lead. And I think we're in a season now, Christians and non-Christians alike, where we have to decide to lead ourselves powerfully. We should not be putting our faith in man. And I think we need to be holding ourselves accountable as well as our leaders accountable. And if your faith is your guiding force now, we don't get to validate and justify when it's convenient. Someone said earlier, our nation has a history of justifying the unjustifiable. And I think we have to be careful that we're not in a place where we're calling evil good and calling good evil. That no matter if our favorite politician, if they are doing something wrong, that we're okay saying that is wrong. And Warren, that's what we've lost. We watch both parties. I'm calling truth to power on both sides here. We let our leaders get away with everything if it suits us politically, if it equals a win. We have to redefine winning if winning means that we literally suppress our actual faith, our actual morality, our actual values just to have a political gain, just to have political power. And so when I say it's a choose you this day moment for my fellow believers, we have to ask ourselves, what are we actually aligning with? Right? It's not so much about the vote itself, but what are our hearts really aligning with? We should be crying over the same things that we believe makes God cry. We should be hurting over the same things that would make our Father in heaven weep. Those should be the things that keep us up at night. And we can't be conflating patriotism with our faith because they're not the same thing. So in this season, I would urge those who consider themselves believers, followers of Christ, to ask, am I choosing to follow a path that I know is righteous, or am I choosing to follow a person that I just like because they do things that I want them to do or say what I want them to say? For me, I look for leaders, Warren, who have exhibited spirit, love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. Those things are important to me, and I look for character. And I believe that if God is almighty, he can raise up leaders who exhibit those characters and still get powerful work done. So I think we all have to hold ourselves accountable in this season for how we're making our decisions, and that we are either have a belief that we follow, or we either justify when it's convenient. I don't think we get to do both.
Let's very briefly talk about the faith in the electoral process.
Yeah.
How confident should we be that this election should be a fair election with the use of the mail-in ballots? Of course, this year is probably going to be unusual because of the COVID-19 pandemic, that many people will opt to utilize the mail-in ballot. What would you do to ensure, if you were in that position, that the people are confident in knowing that the process still works, and in terms of being fair and or accurate?
So I struggle with this when I saw these topics released. We as a campaign have tried to move like a movement, and we've tried to move like a ministry. What I mean by that is we've tried to literally minister to people as we've campaigned. What I mean by that is we want to instill hope and vision into people. We want to take away fear. So there are things that have gone on behind the scenes, Warren, that we have not shared because we did not want to participate in the fear mongering. We did not want to participate in the suspicion, excuse me, in spreading suspicion. But the truth is, I do believe we will see a contentious election. I do believe there will be some unfair play. And the reason I say that is because I know what we have gone through as a campaign and as a candidate. When I tell you the blatant attempts to stop my candidacy have been unreal, that we are now challenging states that have no problem doing things that they know are wrong to deny me a place either on the ballot or even simply as a write-in candidate. And we are having to fight to the final hour to make sure we're a viable option. So I think I'd be naive to say we shouldn't have any concerns, because we're seeing concerns behind the scenes where we're concerned. We believe candidate suppression is voter suppression. I do have concerns about what's going on at the polls. I actually don't have concerns as much about mail-in voting, only because the statistics don't support it. But I do believe that if Americans are comfortable to go to the polls, if your poll location is practicing social distancing and has restrictions in place, go to the polls. I really would encourage you to go in person if you could. Please wear your mask, be as safe as possible. But if you can go in person, do. And do not be turned away lightly. I'm running into people on the streets, Warren, who tell me about different forms of voter suppression, going to one spot, being told they can't vote there, being sent to another spot, being told the same thing. I can tell you that some of the states that we're not on the ballot for, we collected more than the necessary amount of signatures. And yet when we turned those signatures in, we were told that more than half of the signatures weren't registered voters. And they were. These people thought they were registered voters, were able to, tell us when they registered. Yet when we submitted their names, they weren't counted on the roll. So we believe people are being purged from voter rolls. That's why we're not on some of the states that we thought would be on the ballot for. So I do think we have cause for concern. And I think the best way to combat that is to show up in person. And if you are mailing in, mail in as early as possible. We've done the hard work, I'll end by saying, of being as viable as possible for as many Americans as possible. We've released a map that shows you where you can vote for us. In some states, you'll see my name on the ballot. Not as many as we hoped, but we went behind that and made sure that in many of the other states, you can write us in as a registered write-in. It has been difficult. We have been appalled. I have been appalled by how my team has been treated, the indignity, the disrespect that has been given to independent candidates, which really all we are is another American citizen doing exactly what our Constitution affords us the right to do. It seems the manipulation and the corruption is great. So while I hate to sow seeds of suspicion, let me end by sowing a seed of hope. I do believe this is the season that Americans take back their politics, they take back their elections, they vote vision over fear, they show politicians that they are not entitled to, they show this system that we know how to participate in it powerfully, and then we elect people who we believe will do the hard work of reconstructing a system that truly works for American citizens. So don't go in fear, don't be in fear, go and vote for vision and get out there and be brave and courageous and make courageous decisions that will help us enter a brave new era together.
President Trump and Vice President Biden tonight were asked not to declare victory, or that the winning candidate should not declare victory until the election is independently certified. What is your perspective on that and your thoughts?
This election, I believe, is going to take a few weeks to decipher. We have a couple of concerns, so I do agree. No one should declare victory. We should wait this out. You're going to have a couple of things happen. We know statistically that mail-in voting will be done mostly by Democrats. We know that in-person voting will be done mostly by Republicans. As a result, your in-person polls are going to return first. You're going to have what's called possibly a red mirage. We've been reading about this in the news, where it'll appear that one candidate is winning, and then overnight that could shift. And what we don't need is any extra confusion. People talk about the Russians getting involved in the election war, and they've been in our election for a few years, not just since 2016. So we have a lot of things that we have to hold into account. I think it's best that all of us stay back, stay silent, allow the professionals to call it when it's ready to be called. We have electors in all of our states awaiting confirmation and direction from us as well. This is going to take patience. It's going to take prayer. For those of you who pray, we're praying behind the scenes that the righteous thing will be done, that corruption will not prevail, and that Americans will keep their peace. And we just believe now that individual Americans are what's going to make the day. This is not going to be about politicians. How this election plays out will be about how individual Americans take our future into our hands moving forward. Petty says months. It may be months before we know. I think weeks. It might be wishful thinking. Yes. She's right. But I do believe we're in for a bit of a ride here, and we need to be prepared not to jump to any conclusions.
The debate has been officially over for probably the last 20 minutes or so on television, but we want to make sure that we addressed all the questions that were put out there. You didn't get to see them in advance. In fact, what makes this unique is because I didn't get to see it. I was presented with the questions, and we figured this was the best way of being able to have you address on an even scale exactly what was being presented in the debate. Any final words for you that you would like to say? This is your opportunity to the American people.
Yeah, Pernell, I see your question about the military, which is something we're excited about how we plan to serve our military. I won't talk about it here, but what I will do, Warren and everyone else, is tomorrow I'll probably go live and give commentary on the debate that you all watched with Vice President Biden and President Trump. I'll be able to engage in some of the rebuttals at that time. But Warren, you're right. We wanted to go live so that nobody would say I had an unfair advantage, that I had to do the same thing each of the candidates did. What I would end by is say, we really believe this is a season now where individual Americans have an opportunity to create a paradigm shift in our nation. And it's not a shift that we need to be afraid of. I believe that when you talk about the word revolution, the real root of that word means to return to a source that has always given us life. So we get to return now, I believe, to finally upgrade into what we've always been saying we've been. We've been saying we're one nation, but we haven't behaved that way. We've been saying we're great, but it's been a long time. And maybe for many people groups, it's never been the great country that others have been able to experience. But I do believe we have an opportunity now to make this a country where there is equal access to opportunity for all. This is a nation full of hardworking people. Don't believe the stereotypes. Don't believe the demonizations. Don't buy into the division. But I dare you, take a step back from the rhetoric. And what I would ask all Americans to do is to make a list. Make a list of what you want your nation to look like. Make a list of what you want your nation to feel like. And make a list of how you want your leader to move, how you want your leader to think about you, and how you want your leader to talk to you and talk you through these challenging times. And just put your favorite player aside as you make that list. And then you go back and you look at the candidates in front of you, you do your research, decide you're not going to vote for the lesser of two evils, but you're going to vote for vision. And we believe that when you make that list, what you're going to come up with is a plan for restoration. And you're going to see that we have the proposals, the plans, and the vision. I'm excited about what we have planned for this nation. Many of you have already met my vice presidential running mate, Cordelia J. Rose. She is from an incredible military family, and already behind the scenes, she's working on the actual structure, infrastructure, strategy, execution to make sure that we go beyond vision all the way to a blueprint that all Americans can build from. So if you're ready for an age now of not just equality and unity, but of reconciliation, of restoration, and now equal access to opportunity for as many Americans possible, we encourage you to go to OperationRestoration2020.com, do your homework, do your due diligence, and listen to see if the heart of our operation resonates with yours. Thank you so much for all the time you've given us. Thank you, Warren, for allowing me the opportunity to share the vision in this way.
And thank you for being able to spend time with everybody here to share your vision. It's not fair to have just two candidates on the stage. If we want to level the playing field, let's take a look at it from every side. So we thank you. We thank you for everybody for joining us this evening. Do not forget, on October 7th, that's when the vice presidential place, and you will have an opportunity to hear from Cordelia J. Rose as well. On behalf of everybody here, my name is Warren Winston. It's been a pleasure. Have a good evening.
Night.
These are animals.
You cannot do it.
These aren't people.
What if you weren't really seeing the whole story? What if we're not trapped, but we're being reminded of how precious liberty really is? What if in the midst of all the darkness, we're getting a chance to shine brightly together? What if we weren't really divided? What if we were becoming united again? Let's tell the whole story of who we really are. The America where we learn new things together, where we build new things together, where we are revitalized, redeemed, and restored. I'm Jade Simmons, and I'm running with you so that we can finally become who we've always said we've been. One nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all, for real.
I'm Jade Simmons, a candidate for President of the United States, and I approve this message.